The timing is as expected, but it's the aggression of this statement, I think, that really has caught European diplomats aback, because he's not just talking about 30% tariffs. He's saying essentially that they could also be added on to separate sectors. So say, for instance, take the aluminium and steel industry that is targeted already with 25% tariffs.
President Donald Trump has reignited a trade war with the European Union in a letter he posted to Truth Social yesterday. Trump said he will impose a 30% tariff on imports from the EU from the 1st of August this year. And in response, the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen warned the EU could adopt proportionate countermeasures, but will continue working towards an agreement by August the 1st. Joining me now is Nina dos Santos, former CNN international anchor and co-host of the podcast Control Alt Deceit, Democracy in Danger. Nina, welcome to the show. Thanks for coming on. How much of a surprise was this announcement from Donald Trump about tariffs on the EU? Did we not suspect he was going to do something like this?
Hi, Harry. Well, the timing is significant because the United States actually could have been facing, as of next week, the EU's first batch of countermeasures. So the EU already on Tuesday was planning on implementing about 20-odd billion euros worth of countermeasures targeting US goods as part of its first retaliatory package of sanctions in response to the first bunch of tariffs that Donald Trump had lobbied on them. And then, of course, there could be another 70 billion coming thereafter. So the timing is as expected, but it's the aggression of this statement, I think, that really has caught European diplomats aback, because he's not just talking about 30% tariffs. He's saying essentially that they could also be added on to separate sectors. So say, for instance, take the aluminium and steel industry that is targeted already with 25% tariffs. You could have a cumulative effect of 30 plus 25 and have a ratcheting up of the tariffs on top of each other that would just pummel certain key sectors for the EU, like, for instance, steel, cars, and also plane parts. So that is one of the reasons why they've been taken aback. And as a result, I understand there are meetings taking place this Sunday in Brussels with EU diplomats to try and sketch out how the bloc can come to a cohesive response, which will probably end up, if this continues, in a position where they wish to negotiate over the next 3 weeks until these tariffs come on board. But actually, they're also preparing a rather tough proposal of countermeasures to target certain US goods.
Yeah, I mean, so this is the thing, is what does the EU do? Because, I mean, Trump's already sort of gone ahead, as it were, and said if you try and do any countermeasure, if you decide to retaliate, whatever the number you choose to raise them by, we will be added on to the 30% that we charge. I mean, sort of the implication he'll go down the Chinese route, or the route he took with China, and just keep on going up and up and up. I mean, is that really going to happen?
I think that's the real concern that not just the EU will have, but the world will have, because we already saw how disruptive that US-China trade spat was for the world economy, for China, for the United States. The Chinese were able to play the long game, and eventually that prevailed. But, you know, China is a very different type of place to the United States, and Europe views itself as the defender of the international rules-based order. I mean, just listen to the French President Emmanuel Macron, his state visit just a few days ago to the UK. One of the first things he did when he addressed parliamentarians in Britain was to talk about how he viewed his country and the United Kingdom as being essential pillars of upholding that international rules-based order that Donald Trump, according to many EU diplomats, is trying to smash at the moment. So this is partly a case of economics, it's partly a case of transactionalism, but it's also partly, from the EU's point of view, a case of values. Now, what is the United States' position? Well, Donald Trump has long bemoaned the fact that he says that Europe gets a much better deal economically and security-wise from the United States. There's a $235 billion deficit that has widened between the EU and the United States.
But surely that deficit is because, a simple case, that American consumers want more of European goods than European consumers want of American goods. I mean, that's just free trade, isn't it?
That's exactly the point that the EU will try and make. And they've been trying to wheel out their Trump whisperer in chief, Giorgia Meloni, just today, actually, to point that out, saying, well, look, a trade war, transatlantic trade war, will win nobody any favors. Italy, in particular, is very exposed because of its luxury goods sector, but also Ireland, that has a great relationship with the United States thus far. Its pharmaceutical sector could get absolutely pummeled by these types of punitive measures coming from the United States. And so those countries that are already friendly with the United States, they already are starting to be vocal about this and say, look, there will be no winners if there is a big trade war, as you pointed out, Harry, like the one that we saw between the United States and China earlier on in the year, where, remember, those tariffs just got loaded one on top of the other until they ended up in the triple digits. And as such, one of the largest trading relationships in the world temporarily sort of ceased to function. That would have huge implications, not just for the United States, not just for the EU, but also even for places like the UK, because the world economy could be thrown off its axis. And that is what everybody, at least in Brussels, seems to be briefing that they would like to try and avert over the next 3 weeks until these measures come into force on August the 1st.
And just briefly, finally, Nina, can you give me a sense of how Trump's MAGA base view these tariffs? Because obviously the fear is that they're already starting to sort of cause a bit of inflation in the US. I'm not sure if it's actually hitting anyone's wallet so far.
Well, it's obviously very, very difficult to second guess Trump. Difficult also to second guess his base, because remember, he came out with this big, beautiful bill that was going to balloon the deficit in the United States. And some people thought that that would, exacerbate inequality in America and could pummel his own base economically. And he didn't really suffer a huge amount of consequences for that thus far. Some polling has showed that people have soured a bit against his economic stewardship of the world's biggest economy, particularly with regards to the disruption caused by his tariff policy with China, now obviously with the EU. What the EU will probably try and do, and it's done before, is try and target the goods that are made in those very bases of the MAGA movement. So, you're talking about, say, whiskey from America or Harley Davidson motorcycles, those emotive goods. They will probably try and target that if they do come up with countermeasures that are quite significant. From the US's point of view, they'll probably go for, as you'd imagine, sort of cognac in France. But so far, one of the things we should mention is that the stock market, obviously, when it opens up on Monday, is going to react quite significantly to what we've heard over the weekend. And one of the reasons why Donald Trump may have decided to do this right now is because the stock market is still around about a record high. So he probably feels that, when it comes to people who save in America, they're actually doing quite well. Salaries are high and also unemployment is low. So why not try and nail down this trading relationship that he thinks is disadvantageous to the United States right now, when he's got all the cards on his side, especially after the NATO meeting, when security is also in the back of the minds of EU leaders too.
Brilliant. Thank you very much indeed. That was Nina dos Santos, the co-host of the podcast Control, Alt, Deceit, Democracy in Danger.